So, welcome everyone. We are here today in this wonderful conversations to really discuss the community psychology competencies, what they look like, what those foundational principles look like, and how we move forward in coming up with a collective brain trust around voicing that with everybody's voice in it, and then ultimately coming up with a plan to go forward and what those competencies look like in that plan. So today we have myself and Jerry and Susan and Kyra will be facilitating small groups that we're going to jump into to have this discussion. We're going to ask that the small groups go like 10 to 15 minutes, and then we come out with 10 to 15 minutes on each question of the 3 questions, and then we come out with a sort of a collective approach to how we're going to move forward. So I think we can start breaking out into the groups. The questions are in the chat, the 1, 2, and 3 questions that we're going to be looking at. And we're going to do the breakout groups because it's just a more effective way of facilitating open discussion. But we still want, today is all about being concise and prompt. And then we have time as we move forward while everybody digests from today's meeting, ways to move forward, but we want to at least get some action done. So today's all about prompt action. Sound good?
Yeah, I think Susan.
Yeah, how do you want us to take notes?
A recorder in each group who will report out after the group.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure that's all clear.
Yeah, so really quickly, the other thing that I wanted to share is to take a look at the competencies isn't for me to negate the hard work and the task force. I was just looking in the OCP where they were listed, I think initially, and they're very comprehensive, and the task force that worked on them initially were, I would say, just phenomenal in putting them together. And I have a little history of how and why they were formed, which made sense as well. So I want to commend Susan, and I know Pamela Martin and Rhonda Lewis was on that task force. Gloria may have been on that task force as well. And if any of you are here, I want to preface this by, this isn't again about negating the hard work that was put into putting those out, but as any document Benita shared earlier, living documents should be looked at. They're like strategic plans, right? A strategic plan, as you know, is no good if it's sitting on the shelf, but it should be a working document that's pulled down occasionally and dusted off and looked at and, changed and revised, etc., to reflect the trend or reflect the current time, as well as, of course, anything strategic is trying to look at and forecast what's happening in the future too as well, right? And so to that end, that probably may not have been said or shared when the original docs were constructed, but so we want to follow up today to share. And I think with anything that we do as a discipline should be, of course, looked at some point in time to evolve, right? And so that's what I want to preface and say, that here our goal is to just look at them. Do they reflect right now, right? Are there other voices that now want to be involved in putting them together and looking at them and re-looking at them, etc. And so, yeah, that's important for, I think, all of us to make sure. I know that was hard work. I looked at them and really got looking at them in a different lens this morning and saying, this is some comprehensive stuff, and I'm sure the task force, et cetera, had a time really putting them together. So anyway, long story short on that, let's make sure that everybody knows that that's why we're here, is just to bring them to current day. Think about them again. Is something missing? Does something need to stay as it is? I was looking at ecological approach, which is going to make sense now and in the future, right? As we began to really think through and look at our communities from that perspective. So thank you, everyone, if you're here on putting them together first. And I'm so happy that you're joining us now just to make sure they evolve with us as we all change and grow and think about community more collectively than we've ever had before. And I appreciate you and thank you for being here today.
And then Jerry, I'm going to add to that, just in general on everything SCRA. I think the desire to move forward and to refresh things and to add new pieces is not about dismantling the past or discrediting or undervaluing anyone. It's really about just bringing everything up to speed, like you said, and up to where it's more inclusive and diverse and welcoming. So are we ready to do the breakout into the groups for the first question? Okay, yeah, so the questions are, the guiding questions are in the chat. Once again, in the small groups, we're trying to be just concise. We're not gonna, save the world today in this meeting, but we're gonna try to just make action our focus and being short and concise, and unfortunately less philosophizing, no judgment, and really like put our egos and our personal missions aside, and just really try to come up with a collective SCRA action. So Yadwiga, can we break out into the groups?
I'm on it. Here
Are
we
you
go,
gonna do
guys.
4 groups or 5 groups?
You could do it at random and let the system,
No, but how many?
I have it in
somebody
5
may be
groups.
short. Well,
Yeah,
it's 28, so yeah.
5 groups, and
That's 5
someone's
groups.
gonna make sure we get a facilitator in each group.
Yeah, so Tom, myself, Jerry, Susan, Kyra, we just want to make sure one of us is in every group. Thank you. Thank you, Yadwiga.
Okay. Let me.
Very briefly, and then we'll move back into the second question breakout.
So I'm lost.
I'm sorry, Jerry, say that again.
I'm lost. What are we doing?
So we just came back from the breakout on the first question, right? That was the idea.
No, that wasn't we talked about the second question.
Oh, okay.
So somebody.
It's all good.
Well,
It's good.
when we come back, when the next group, why don't you do the first question and we'll do the second, and you can do the report out on whatever question you did.
Okay, so one of the things that I want to share now, and I don't know if others agree, is we're not going to come up with a concrete solution today, right? This is ever evolving, and we were talking about in the group that we were in. This could take 6 months. I don't know the time length to that. So the plan should be just, or the plan could, let's consider thinking about ongoing workshops, whether they're in the practice council or we move out of the practice council, because I know there's lots of other stuff Tom probably wants to get done, or this could be it. I certainly am not speaking to that, but I do want to share and ask others about the ongoing process of this work. And so I think action is thinking through how to put a new competencies right in place, if that makes sense.
So I'll just chime in. I think today was just about starting the brainstorming, just kind of starting to activate it. And with each question, we came away with just our discussion group. We came away with some ideas to begin going, oh, we hadn't thought about that. So I think that's really what today should be about on the 3 questions in each breakout. and then we come away with enough that we can put together, something to get people thinking. Because I think this is going to take some thinking and digesting before we actually really can start moving forward. But at least we just want to take action today.
Got it.
So in the interest of time, though, can we just have the recorders just, state what they came up with, whatever the question was you went on the first session, just identify the question,
Sure.
state it, and then we'll move into the next breakout.
Group
I'll
one,
jump in. Oh,
Okay, I took notes for group one. We started talking about that term competency, but then got into that sort of focus on that need to begin with some foundation, and I don't know if they're principles or what. The most important being that the need to start community psychology with a deep dive, doing the work on yourself in terms of, issues of racism, oppression, but also the why. Why do you want to do this? Especially when we're thinking like white people walking into graduate programs saying, I want to get this so I can go work in Black and Indigenous communities. Why? Why do you think that, so just really that idea that it's not even a competency, it's before even beginning that need. It's a little off the topic, but at the same point, it's so important to our thinking about moving forward with this.
And then group two?
so I took notes for group two, and I think to put our we only got to the first question. And so to put it succinctly, I think to answer that bigger question of what is the change that needs to happen, I think all of our kind of smaller comments really bubbled into this idea of emphasis on the function, and understanding the function, whether that means what is the community's response or folks who are outside the field reaction and understanding of that word, and what does that word mean for us in terms of skill, attitude, belief, orientation, like all of those things. So a lot of different things bubbled up, but and hopefully group two agrees with me that that's kind of the umbrella of what all of those things kind of meant for our discussion.
can everybody who's reporting out put the notes into the chat so they're saved? Thank you. We have them on the recording, but easier.
And then three?
Hey, I took notes for group three. I did put them in the chat. We did cover multiple questions, and we started just by talking about ways in which each of the group members felt about the term, and most of us felt it was problematic for a number of reasons. We also were shown and got to see a little bit about the Canadian Evaluation Society, and they do have the term competencies, but they really add on to it nicely and talk about the backgrounds, knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and talked about different critiques of the term, that it's too professionalized, that it's not a good match for a decolonial perspective, and that there's been critiques and challenges of it for quite a while, certainly going back to the Global Journal special issue. Talked a little bit about arguing that the term doesn't help us establish full strength and power for people. So one analogous consideration is the term cultural competency and how the thinking on that has changed more towards cultural sensitivities or process of learning and reflexivity. So how could we potentially apply that type of a shift to community psych CP competencies? And so, I think it actually cut off my notes, I'll add to them. And then finally, we talked about what the needs for, why we came up with competencies in the first place, and how some of those needs still exist, but there's even additional needs for how we communicate what we do to various stakeholders and members of communities. And then in terms of kind of what to do about it, we talked about the importance of hearing students' perspectives and thinking about different ways of knowing and adding that kind of a language to what we're doing.
And then four?
I took the notes for group 4, and we talked a lot about the word competency and how that functions to sort of set maybe the wrong stage. Michelle had a great idea that she kept thinking about the word commitment. So maybe we will never be competent in a particular area, but we can make a commitment to that area. We did spend a substantial amount of time talking about competency number 3, which is the sociocultural and cross-cultural competency. And along with that idea of we may never be competent in that way, we talked about maybe that should be more like humility instead of competency, or commitment to that humility, as well as making that more emphasizing structural and systemic issues around sociocultural and cross-cultural humility, as opposed to just that individual relationship. And I think just based on what I've heard from other groups, you know, if we start with this idea of doing the work internally, those individual relationships would be covered in that. And so then our work becomes about the system and the structure.
And then 5.
Excuse me. So we had a very rich conversation around the concept of competencies. Started off talking about, do we need one word? We discussed, should we keep it action focused? What we do, how we act, since competency has a colonizing and westernized connotation to it. And we are about action research, so keeping it more open seems relevant. We discussed how the word itself translates into key skills, meaning you are capable of performing them. We discussed how this also may get misunderstood by some groups, or may have some negative impact, may land incorrectly with some other groups. So we got to consider this phrase or this term a little bit more clearly. But we do need to be careful about how it lands with persons, and especially accessibility communities. Need to also take a broader look and at it, and maybe take a step-by-step approach, thinking that this is part of a process that will end up in a different place down the road, but that we also need to honor the people that came before us, who were doing the best that they could given the circumstances, and push that rock forward at that point in time from where things were at, allowing us to sort of decolonize the decolonization that was going on at the time, which is a little bit meta and a little bit postmodern, but let's roll with it because it's a good idea. Also it was discussed how the phrase capabilities comes from developmental economics, and it has been vetted in other professional contexts as well, and plays outside of North America.
Thank you, all of our recorders. That was fabulous. What I'm thinking we could do is step back into our breakout groups just to wrap up, to finish any questions that weren't discussed. So back into our same breakouts, and then come back and then do just a kind of a final summary. I agree, as Jerry said, that we're not gonna save the world and solve all the problems today, but I think we've started a dialogue now, a collective dialogue that we can all individually kind of work on. And we also suggested maybe creating a Google Docs that we can all kind of, as things pop up over the coming days and weeks, we can jump in and make comments, which I think looks like it would be the best solution right now, because it seems like, you know, not everybody's available to think or contribute, or, you know, maybe we're not, you know, we have our minds other places. So I will volunteer myself to create that doc and kind of set up a little bit of structure. And then I'm going to ask, please, that the recorders jump in and kind of make sure that the information looks good. And then we can just make it a living, growing doc. Does that, I mean, do we agree? Does that sound good? Nodding heads. Okay, awesome. So can we do a breakout just to kind of sum up and then cover any questions we feel we didn't do? Yes, Tom.
The groups that I was in did not cover the specific competencies at all. We just dealt with the term. So right. Jerry had prepared the information on the specific competencies, and I thought that's what we were going to do in this question. Am I wrong?
Well, aren't there 17? So I don't see how we can't really do them all today, but I think
but do the same
kind of-
thing we had with competencies, have discussion about what
Right.
should be in the specific ones, what's in there now.
right.
And then the last question was going to be, where do we go from here?
Right. And I think we kind of solved a little bit of the last question about where do we go from here, because we are agreeing to this Google Doc where we can start, populating it with our ideas. And maybe we'll also have all the competencies in there. So it could just be this living doc of our comments. So I think
That's the document part. With Susan, we've got to talk about a process that's
Right.
going to involve lots of people.
right.
Okay.
So do we want to do another brief breakout just to finalize? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, and that's at this point, I mean, we got maybe like 10 minutes or so on the second breakout, and then come back and kind of finalize what we want to do next. Does that sound good to everybody? And in the break,
For 90
Yes.
minutes. We're scheduled for
Pardon?
90 minutes.
oh, okay, we are for 90 minutes. Okay, good. So we can go back into the breakout, and then let's work on what the next question was that was not covered. So if everybody did one, or I know, Jerry, you said your group worked on two, then go back to one. For the other groups, we'll go to two. And then we'll come back and the recorders will discuss that. And then we're going to do the final question in another breakout, right? And then we'll come back and just kind
Or
of
we can do it as a
finalize.
whole group at that point.
Pardon?
We can do that as a whole group. The last
Right.
question.
Okay, we'll do it as a whole group. All right, so we'll go to this next breakout and then discuss the other question that was not discussed. And then we'll come back and then we'll do the third question as an entire group. Yes, Tom?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right, back into the groups that we were in. Thank you, everyone, for just staying with this process. We appreciate all of you.
Yadwiga?
Big chills. So can we just do the recorders, and we'll be succinct about it too, so that we'll have the next, like if we get that done in the next like 5-6 minutes, and then we'll have the rest of the 30 minutes to do our open discussion on the question 3. And I'm going to switch it up. So I'll start with group 5 recorder for this, because I think what we covered may be something that's really valuable on a deeper level for you guys. So Vincent?
Gladly. Gosh, I was preparing to take a couple of minutes to summarize this succinctly, but let me just take a shot at it. So we started off thinking about how some of the competencies and the foundational principles really don't necessarily apply equally at different levels, and they need to be broken out, need to be considering that there are different levels depending on the need and the context, may need a list of groups from whom we need input, such as undergraduates, practice, nonprofits, need to know the context of individuals from Swampscott and previous iterations of developing these competencies and approaches in order to be able to fully understand what they intended, so that we can learn from that as well. And to need to make sure that our programs also have principles and content for courses, because we use these oftentimes for course alignment, for helping students reflect on what they learned, did not learn, areas of growth for them, but also with program assessment. And we discussed a little bit about some of the history where there's a need for community, where there was a need in particular for community psychology, probably still a need in some places, to establish a role in broader psychology departments and in the professional world beyond that. And then we kind of transitioned a little bit into this concept of being not just self-reflective, but also presenting ourselves in a way that is incredibly important to create space for communities to be the experts in what they're experts at. Just as we bring a certain expertise to the table, we don't portray ourselves as the experts in anything in particular. We've got some skills. We share those skills, and we learn together with communities, as opposed to going in to try to fix them. How's that?
That's perfect, Vincent. And I'm going to tack on to the end that within our group, we were talking about that being the essence, this magnificent essence of community psychology is the ability to be self-reflective and to really create a space where psychology becomes that, that really transformative field. And so, and we were saying how like in other divisions and in other field, disciplines of psychology, that isn't the case. There is a lot of self-promoting and there is a lot of, focus for career. And we're really about doing that healing work and being transformative. And that's not a blanket statement, but so we kind of wanted to push that. And then I'm gonna now move to group 4, recorder, please.
Okay, that's me. Actually, yeah, we dovetail kind of nicely into that. One of the last things we were talking about was about understanding the limits of what we bring to the table and making sure that we're not, as Michelle had said, weaponizing the science of psychology in very unhelpful ways. The other thing that we talked about is about gatekeeping and expertise and that sort of thing. And one of the things that led to was a talk about the competencies, or whatever they will be called, as a living document. And so that sort of made us talk about, well, it's not just about what the words say, it's about the form in which it takes in dissemination. If it's going to live and breathe, is it best as words on a piece of paper, or is it best as some sort of way to interact with it? And we talked about, ways that, it could be interactive across a bunch of different platforms, or, more like a 360-degree review where the communities themselves can then go in and say, are we meeting their needs or are we not meeting their needs? And so as we think about what these competencies can and should do, what is the dissemination vehicle look like, and how do we keep it living and breathing rather than just putting it as words on paper?
And 3, please.
That was great. So let's see. So we jumped into a couple of the specific foundational principles. We talked about socio and cross-cultural competence. That was the original framing. And so we asked, do we need a competency related to understanding historic roots and systemic factors of current injustices? Weaved into that one. For community inclusion and partnership, we talked about the importance of going beyond having a voice and being heard or being in the room, but including self-determination, and that those who are most affected by an issue or in a context having power and control to make decisions. So for instance, in cases when there's participatory budgeting, it still tends to be on the margins and a small portion of the budget, and that ought to be flipped around where that's really the majority of budgets. And then with ethical reflective practice, we thought about the importance of building in the importance of positionality and transparency about identities and intentions of community psychologists, which I think connects to what Susan Wolf was saying earlier. And then we also considered the conception of normality, as well as transformational learning that isn't currently expressed in the foundations as they are written.
Thank you. And 2?
So group 2, we spent some time just kind of further discussing and reflecting and kind of continuing some of conversation related to question 1. But essentially, there was common consensus that we really liked this commitments kind of idea and what that meant, and potentially even what that means for aligning competencies or skills and commitments, and what that looks like, and this idea of either or, what that looks like, but ultimately whatever kind of terminology that's used, the importance of defining it in a very specific and intentional way. And kind of what's the relationship, from the competencies to the larger SCRA principles and values, like even trying to answer that before, what does this look like? What do these changes look like? What's that relationship? And the importance of, and this kind of, well, I'll save that for later, but I think that was kind of the broad strokes of what we kind of continued our conversation about.
Thank you. And then group one.
Hey, group one addressed question 2. We started looking through the specific competencies, and I think we could have discussed them for another 2 hours because, we just had so many amazing thoughts about them. We'd already talked about the idea of cross-cultural competence. But interestingly, among ecological perspectives, which so many of us consider so central to our field, the comment came up that we are centering ourselves in it rather than Mother Earth. Mother Earth is who we are relying on for our own survival. And yet she is not at the center of our concept of ecological perspectives. We are. So I thought that was like, wow, that one really made me think. Empowerment, again, kind of has this idea, of a top-down approach. It has this idea that something we're giving. So that term is also, suggestions were like support. Or something like that, but empowerment sounds, again, kind of colonial. Ethical reflective practice, that's where we thought encompasses, it's entirely inadequate as it's written because it doesn't encompass our own deep dives and our own, like someone said earlier, look at our own positionality or even our motivations for engaging in this work and where are they coming from and why? Is it about us or is it really about community? Program development, implementation, management. The management word gave some folks problem. And also someone said they're thinking of a worldview that more speaks to self-determination, that people don't go into communities to create self-determination. And yet that sort of self-determination is what is needed to sustain programs. Mm-hmm. And then community mentoring was another, when we got to the leadership and mentoring, that mentoring, usually if there's a mentor, that means somebody knows something and somebody doesn't, and it puts us in the position of owning. And this only captures a piece of what was said. The conversation was so rich that it was just, there's a lot. It showed me just how much there is that we really need to do to rethink how we even approach who we are.
So thank you, Susan. And thank you, everyone, really, truly. I'm going to say on SCRA's behalf from the bottom of my heart for really, for us really doing this deep dive today and sort of reframing the, as what was brought up in my group, the context of why we're even here and what we're doing and getting out of the business of being community psychologists and really getting into the passion and the purpose of it and the meaning of it. So now we want to move into looking at that last question about how we plan to move forward with all of this rich information. And again, I'm going to say, we do good in group, you guys. We do really good in group. We got to keep finding ways to have these spaces where this many of us can get together and really have each other's back. We have people checking the chat, people stepping up to record, people helping guide conversations, bringing in all their ideas. That many hands make light work. It needs to be our motto going forward. So I guess I'm just going to open it up to, we could try just kind of open it up to conversation, and then let's see if we needed to kind of raise hands and try to do a little more structure in it. Yeah. So on question 3.
I was, and this may simply be my need because I'm still new to SCRA and I'm also sort of transitioning from previous world into sort of working on my own. So please tell me if that's the case, but I'm wondering if we could keep the dialogue alive between meetings. we all have sort of been in those community situations where, you have a meeting and a month later you come back and it takes you 20 minutes to remember what it is that actually happened in the previous meeting. I would certainly be open to, if others are exchanging our emails for in between meetings, and then it can be for those that wish to participate. I know there is sort of the dreaded reply all, which can fill inboxes very, very quickly. But, I think as long as we're sort of honest about that and say, look me out of this, it can be possible to manage it. Otherwise, it might take us a very, very long time to get to a place of developing something. And I also like the idea, Vanita, of the Google Docs. I think that's a great way for us to work together.
So let's do the Google Docs for sure. And I think the best thing, because I want to pay attention to what's happening, is post this meeting for me to just set it up and then put it out. And then I'll ask Jadwiga to make sure that everybody gets it when they, along with access to the recording. And I like the idea of having some sort of open, ongoing dialogue. So does anybody have any ideas about how we can do that? I know there are some people who use Slack and some of these other group apps. And I mean, I agree, it can be distracting if not everybody's on, these platforms and stuff. So yes, Tom.
Well, there's an existing commitment that was made with SCRA, and Susan's going to carry it forward to create a new competencies. And we're looking in the original document, it was a partnership with, Mason has his hand up, with the Council on Education, the Practice Council, and others. And the person who I'd like to hear from, if she's still here, is, I see her name, is Amber, the new executive director, because I don't think this should actually fall into your lap, Renita. It should really be in Amber's lap. And how do you set up a place for all of us to chat? How do we set up the document? And I think that's really what SCRA is there for, to take that load off of us. But I think.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I wasn't trying to take on any more responsibilities. I was trying to guide the dialogue.
I also mentioned that Teresa indicated she had something to say a little while ago. Could we give Teresa?
Okay, so can we do Teresa and then Mason and then do Amber? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. I guess to answer the very first question is kind of what does this look like going forward? One of the things I was thinking about is inviting community partners to work with us on these competencies, or whatever we're going to call them, just because I've noticed we're all, community psychologists, and yet we don't have the voices of the folks that we work with. And I think that would be really beneficial.
Ooh.
Great.
Can I say something in response to that?
So Deirdre, can we just have Mason speak?
Sure.
And then we'll put you in the queue, and then after that, Amber.
Yeah, I had just a concrete suggestion for continuing the dialogue. We do have Basecamp, that SCRA has access to. It's kind of a, workstation, group online approach. That I think that could work well, and also give people the capacity to limit their exposure to ongoing conversation and easily, find the threads that they're interested in. So, I mean, I found it effective in some contexts. So that, and since we do have a subscription as an organization, that might be something that we take a look at using. The other thing I was going to suggest was, and I think this relates to Tom's point, it would be good, I think, to involve, committees, interest groups, councils, as many of our groups in SCRA as possible. Have everybody kind of, take a look at this product as we create it, because I think the whole continuum of interest groups, covers a pretty broad range of perspectives. And if everybody belonging to an interest group or committee or council in the context of that group had an opportunity to respond, I think people would feel that it was a very inclusive process.
Thank you, Mason. And now Deirdre.
I think some of it was already answered, but I would just say we have to be careful with setting the table for others to join us. Just be careful of the history with that, and how oftentimes it can kind of result in a certain type of tokenism with inclusion of our community members, and the thing may be to see what tables they set for us to come to, that where we can be a part of their process and including who we are as part of their process rather than the other way around. Just a suggestion for consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good point. So maybe we keep the process internal while we sort out our stuff before we then entertain the idea of being invited and or including other community members. And then Kyra, your hand was up, and then Amber, please.
I believe, my comment was mentioned, so I'll go ahead and just pass the torch to Amber.
I want to take it back to what Tom was saying in terms of sort of supporting. And so I don't look at this as, okay, SCRA, as ED leading this, I look at this as a collaborative effort with members and communities. And so in any way that as leadership can support, whether it's using things like Basecamp or other mechanisms to continue this conversation, to definitely let us know so we can figure out the best way to provide that support to continue the progress that we've already started. But this in no way should be done as a vacuum.
Now, I wanted to say one thing after Amber. Mason mentioned including the communities, councils, interest groups. And Tom noted that Sarah wasn't mentioned in all of this either. But the other thing is, a lot of our members are not engaged in groups. And I would like to open up the comments and the input to the entire SCRA membership rather than just groups here or there, because there are so many people out there with these like incredible ideas and thoughts that just aren't part of anything. But if we opened up a document or something and said, hey, you can just throw your ideas up here, they may feel comfortable to do that. You know what I mean? Whereas maybe they don't have time or some other reason they're not in an interest group or a council or something. So I think that the initial input, and I love that Vernita started that idea that we get some Google Docs or something up there so that, you know, we can set them up in a way that has everybody commenting not only on the concept of competencies and how should we be framing these, but also commenting on what competencies aren't on the list and what are the problems with the competencies that are on the list. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a good starting point. The other is that we're going to have to make a plan to get this done. I don't want to put timelines because timelines present artificial constraints perhaps, but I want to put maybe at some point we develop, when do we decide that this is done? Sort of more how do we know when we're done, or how do we know when we're ready to move to the next phase kind of thing, as opposed to an actual timeline, if that makes sense. Just to make sure that we actually don't fall into this thinking to the point where we're stuck. You know, like we can't get these. I've seen that with so many coalitions, you know, that I work with, that they start working on something, but they can't move it forward because there's so many cool ideas. And I don't want us to fall into a spin around that. So we're going to need to think through, when do we decide it's time to move to the next phase or the next action we want to take? But not necessarily thinking in terms of a timeline, because then that artificially constrains.
Thank you, Susan, for pointing out that. I see Jerry and Megan's hands are up, so I'm going to say this quickly, that I will try to structure the document in a way that there's areas so people can know where they're commenting. And then I think it's going to be organic. I think we're going to know when we need to go in there and, you know, when the cake's done enough that we need to take a piece off. And then I'm sorry, Jerry, Megan, do you know who was put their hands up first? I didn't catch that.
I
don't know. Although
yeah, go ahead, Megan. Yep, I'm fine.
Oh,
yep, go ahead.
Sure. And I think actually you might have just said my ask, Bernita, great minds. But Yeah, I was just going to ask of the organizer, like we've addressed the question of like the overall label of the thing, and then we've started to go into the individual granular competencies. And I was just going to say, like, could we have an outline? You know, it's much easier to work on something when we have the subsections or the outline. And I think that's what you just said, Vernita, which is great. Which maybe isn't exactly the same outline that it had before. So would also just throw that out there. It might look different, but just to have one.
And then Jerry, please.
So I think this aligns with Benita's point about organic. I think I'm not sure that Nicole did, but one of the things that we thought about in terms of how to make this a living, ongoing doc was something similar, platforms such as Google Docs, right? And that way it becomes, so two things I want to bring up is if it's in there, and this also is to Susan's point about when do we know, I think, and so I mentioned the community toolbox, Vincent, so just so you know, I threw that one out there because I don't know if we attach the doc to there. And I also, Judah brought up the fact that we've got the textbook going on in the OER platform. And my whole point about all of that is that you can go in and update anytime that you want to. And so whether or not we choose where the textbook is, Lenny's textbook is there as well. But the point I'm making, the toolbox is a framework for that. Wherever that's decided, I'd like to look at it, and to Susan's point about when is it done, it's never done in my, you know, as we're thinking about it, right? It's this ongoing perpetual doc that I hope once I retire and move off to somewhere it's warm or whatever and never to be seen again, that all the generations of people coming behind it will be able to go in there and say, this started like we talk about Swampscott, right? 50 years ago. And now, you know, that it's still up there somewhere so that it does do what we say that we want it to do, and that's be perpetual, right? That's so that it goes on and on. And I think that answers the question of how do we know? We don't know, and that's okay. And that goes back to Benita's point about not knowing is okay, because when somebody gets an idea or it goes in there, right, then that's a point in time when it should be added to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Jerry, I think the idea of having the structure. So what I'm thinking of is like almost like an index at the front of the Google Doc where people can see the categories. And Megan, maybe you want to join me in just kind of framing that out, like you said, since our little minds work that way. And then have it where, you know, where people can then go to that section whenever they're inspired, which means around the clock, people in, you know, internationally in global areas where they can come to these meetings right now, can then jump into the doc. They can watch this recording. They can get, you know, our basic gist of what was going on, and then they can go into the doc and add whenever. And Jerry, I agree. Then people can then go into the doc and pull out what they need at the time. That's a fresh brand, you know, like energized current, you know, comments on that principle, and be able to utilize it in their work, and then bring back that from practice and go, look, I tried this principle and this is what I found where it fell short, and this is where it's glorious. And so I mean, I'm just so blown away by everyone today. I'm getting choked up.
Yeah, and I thought about asking the question of what would I put in the front of our textbook on case stories and community psychology practice would be, you know, taking from this living doc, or, you know, condensing it, of course, for room's sake, et cetera. But, you know, it would look like, we talked about this, like I think it was Michelle or either Teresa's point, on commitment or reflections. And the word that came up for me this morning, I want to put out there quickly because I know we want to move into the other space, is navigating, right? You know, there was this big thing on patient navigators that came up at one particular point in time to have this space where if you have reflections, or if we have something like reflections on navigating communities, et cetera. And so I'm going back to what would be a great preface in the front of the textbook on community psychology practice. And it's what we're really doing, is reflecting on how the practitioners navigated a certain community, right? And so, you know, from that umbrella or that particular framework, I said, you know, that would be awesome to have these bullet points or whatever you want to, you know, it comes to. And that happens in community as we're doing right now. So yeah, that was what I wanted to throw out there as well.
And then the irony is that we're practicing community, rebuilding our community. Tom, you were gonna speak up?
As we leave from here, I love what we're laying out, but I see in the room people who I am assuming are going to take some responsibility for this. Susan and the executive committee, Amber and as the executive director, Kyra from the practice council, Mason from the council on education, people who are running programs like Judah and Vince, so that there's a lot of places where this will percolate, and we'll bring it back in some form. Certainly, I'm sure we'll do some of this at the biennial, but I think the practice council group that initiated this with the conversations will find another way to at least keep it going in that form. And so anybody else who thinks they can keep carrying it in some existing piece of SCRA, just speak up now so we can track it. Does that make sense? I labeled a lot of people to do things, but I think all of them, that's what they're thinking of doing. No? Okay.
Ira noted that Alice had his hand up. Could
yeah.
give Al a chance to speak, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, Al, please.
Oh, hi. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I would appreciate it if when we put the various competency proposals out to the community of community psychologists, that we do it in chunks, not as one large, huge document. For a couple of reasons. Number one is, at least for me, my mind starts to wander after a while. Most of you are busy. If I went to a community group and said, would you take a look at this huge document and tell me how it should be fixed? I don't think I'd get much useful response except get out of here, Ratcliffe. So think about putting it out in chunks, maybe 2 competencies at a time, and getting comments and then revising, rather than throwing the whole document out there.
Yeah, I think what we wanted to do is just have, like Jerry was saying, one fountain in the middle of the courtyard where everybody comes to drink and do their business, but that we could pull off each chunk when we need to look at things deep, you know, more deeply, but that we have one source document where everybody can go back to, so we don't lose track of really great notes. So I think that was what it was about, like not trying to discuss the whole entire thing, but just being able to at least have some place that we all know that's the link to where the main document is. So all these great ideas don't get kind of fizzled out. Like Christiane was saying, like, we don't want to lose anybody's ideas. And then it gives people a chance in the middle of the night, like I'm a 2 a.m. thinker sometimes, so that we can jump in and, you know, scratch out our little notes and then kind of come back. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, Al makes a point, and I thought of how we can do it both ways. We can have everything up there, but maybe every week or 2 weeks or something, throw out something to the membership. Make this kind of a fun thing so that, hey, everybody, this week we're all looking at this. Jump in there, yes. Give us your, so that they have everything. When they go there, they see everything. But for now, we're focusing here this week. But you're welcome to comment anywhere else too. And let's make it like a really fun, engaging kind of thing where we get the membership excited about, you know, engaging with this. Maybe even think if we could come up with some kind of incentives or fun drawings, or, you know, let's make this something pizza. Everybody wants to do.
Pizza is good.
Yeah, pizza.
Pizza.
These videos are fun.
And Mason, you had your hand up.
No, that was an accident. I just meant to give a thumbs up to Susan's comment about doing sort of blasts on particular competencies. I like that idea.
You guys are awesome because we're talking about food around this. So yeah, I wish the biennial was live so we could sit around and eat about this. Anybody else have any comments or need to compelled to get something out, or because I think we're about wrapping up here.
I want to
Jerry,
thank.
is your hand still up?
Go ahead.
No, I think Jerry, you're done, right? You had your hand was still up.
Me? Oh, yes. No, that was the old hand.
Yeah.
So the new hand just is sharing. So if we could just go over what we're doing, give me some bullets. Like Benita, you're putting this in. You're putting a Google Doc up, right?
Right. So I'm putting a
Okay.
Google Doc up that's
Okay.
going to be the greater conversation. To
Okay.
summarize, I'm putting a Google Doc up that's going to be the greater conversation. I'm going to ask Yadwiga and Amber to sort out sending it out, disseminating it to the entire SCRA membership. That's everybody, not just interest groups or whatever. So this is an entire SCRA all-in venture, right? Then Susan was talking about having, like principle of the week, and we discussed like a certain thing and maybe putting some gamification around it to make.
Before we get to the point of the week, that I'm just trying to think through now. Benita's putting up the Google Doc.
Right.
Are we meeting again? Give me some.
I don't think we've sorted that out yet, because I think we all need a minute just to process. This has been a really positive, engaging meeting, and I think we all just need a minute to process. And I think that's going to be dialogue that's coming once we all get a chance to just digest over the weekend and the next couple of days.
Okay.
So those are the two things. And then also Tom was asking, because recruiting is another, I guess, colonized word, but inviting people to join in the process and put their name on it, that they would take action to support it. So we were also looking for, those basically three things. And then of course, we're going to be leaning on Amber and Yadwiga as our administrative guides to help us kind of, manage all of this.
Okay.
So that's basically the four things we got going on right now.
So what was four? I'm sorry, what was four?
So first is the Google Doc.
Got it.
Second is, out to all the community with the recording.
Yep.
Then second is we want to get people involved in doing it. We're going to try to break down bite-sized pieces of the principles to look at each week with some gamification. And then am I missing, what was the other thing?
Action to support the process.
Right. And so people stepping up. And again, since there's so many of us, everybody can take small bites and take bites within their schedules and their lifestyles, and we can get this done.
And what was four?
Amber, please.
Oh, I was going to say, you can also add that me and Susan will figure out how to incorporate this into the biennial.
Yes.
In terms of getting a larger feedback.
Yes, because the hope was to keep the energy moving. And I think that's also going to be our commitment to it. And then my final thing was, I was thinking, because this is how I work, of a project name or some kind of name that we can align to this. I know we said brain trust earlier, but I think that's kind of a little bit colonized term. So I think I'll try to grab Megan if she's going to help me structure the document, and then just come up with a name. And then of course people can edit it if they want. We don't have to be married to it, but just so that we know, we say a word and we all know what it means, right? Like we have the interest groups, or we have the terminology that we can all know what we're talking about. So does that sound good? And I see a lot of people have left, so I guess we need to wrap this up. Tom, I will turn it back to you as conversations practice game person. And thank you everyone again for allowing me to facilitate the larger meeting today, and for being so responsive and so engaging. I really am tearing up. Appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Vernita. Thank you, Jerry.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Facilitators. Thanks for all the council leaders who are here, and for Amber and Yadwiga. I think we've got the structure to make this thing move forward.
Okay.
And I can say that we don't have a conversation. I think we don't have a conversation for May. So if we want to pick it up then, we could do that, although it's exhausting. An hour and a half with all these smart people. Thank you all.
Yep.
Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Okay.
Bye,
Yep.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Move forward.
Bye, thank you.
Bye
guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, all the best.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. And I will stop the recording.
Amber, you okay with all this?
Yeah, just stopping the